Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Hello, guys. Okay. What can these Roman skeletons tell us about life in Roman London? History Hit, one of my favorite channels, for sure. Preemptive like. Original link to the video. Ooh, this came out yesterday, so I should be able to post it today. Original link to the video, top of the description. Like always, right below that, link to the Discord. Click on it, send you right over there. My name is Connor, if you are new. I am from Rhode Island, which is in New England, which is in the US, and I like to learn. Yeah, let's go. If you are not ready to learn, there's the door. You know the drill by now. You're in the wrong class. Home ec's down the hall. Make me a muffin. Let's go.
The amount just this person can tell us about the nature of everyday life in Roman London.
By looking at the shape of their upper jaw, their maxilla, we can see that they are of African descent. And then the Romans had like these very peculiar ideas about what toothpaste should be made out of, like various kind of dried dog poo, and it's just better left.
Lovely.
Yeah, we just won't explore that.
I had to do a sound check, guys, sorry.
So, Rebecca, where did the Romans bury their dead in Roman London?
Well, like every other town in the Roman Empire, they were instructed by law to bury outside of the Roman walls. Right. Which kind of works a lot of the time. So we have burials all around the city walls, but of course, as the settlement grows, burials end up being encountered. Yeah. And then we also have quite a few burials that we would call like clandestine burials. Oh. So there is a man who was put headfirst down a well.
Really? My word.
Lots of kind of bits of people that we find in rubbish heaps.
And are there any specific sort of cemeteries that we know about, sort of around Roman London?
Well, most of the time I know them by their streets.
Right.
So, so we've divided them according to the compass points, and just to make it easier, because there's so much development in London, you have lots of individual sites that actually all together form big cemeteries.
And Rebecca, were people buried in different ways, sort of throughout the chronology of Roman London?
Yes, and that's a reflection of where people are coming from. You have very distinctive patterns within the whole burial population. So Roman London, it's notable for not having very many grave goods. So most people we find don't have anything. Right. And that's because, you know, if they're buried with textiles or wood, that doesn't survive. There's also, as you say, the chronological difference. So very early on, we have these incredibly wealthy, high-status cremations of men, and they are clearly being buried in a Mediterranean style. We have people in wooden coffins as well. We also have some very high-status burials, like the Spitalfields Roman woman, where they're buried in lead coffin, and those lead coffins have been brought to London probably from elsewhere in Britain. So
if you look at a skeleton like this person then, because this is a person, what sort of scientific analysis are you doing here to both date the burial, but also to look at where this person may have come from? So
the skeleton captures lots of information that we don't find in any other form of archaeological evidence. By just looking at the skeleton, we can see for this individual, they're female, they've got really wide sciatic notches, and also the shape of their cranium tells me that as well. Right. So you can see that her upper leg bone has been cut, and that's her femur, and we took a bit of bone out of the femur in order to date her burial, because she's one of the very late Roman burials that we have, and so we wanted to kind of see exactly when she was being buried, and that came out as the early 400s, 300s. We also looked at areas of her pelvis, so this bit here, and that can tell us how old she was when she died. So she was about 36 to 45. Okay. We don't know what she died from, because nothing came back in the DNA. We don't.
I'm curious how they can tell from the pelvic bone the age, and why the pelvic bone.
She was. So what she died. She was about 36 to 45. Okay. We don't know what she died from, because nothing came back in the DNA analysis about that. So if people often have things like tuberculosis, that shows up. The DNA of that disease can be found.
Okay.
But what it did tell us was that she actually has light brown hair.
Wow.
Which is really really amazing. Yeah, unfortunately, it didn't work for her eye colour or her skin colour.
Right.
You may have noticed that on her jaw there's a little bit of green staining.
Right.
And that's because she was buried with these enormous brooches that are like these huge pepper pots that were joined together by these really beautiful chain of glass beads. And so they would have been like absolutely, like you couldn't have missed them.
Right.
She's also then had this bone comb which was placed behind her head.
Right.
These are what are called Germanic objects, so they're found in Roman Germany. By looking at the chemicals in your dental enamel, the white hard dental enamel, we were able to show that she was actually born outside of Britain, so she's probably spent her early childhood in the German area of Europe. So she's someone who grew up on the continent, born white hard. The chemicals in your dental enamel, the white hard dental enamel, we were able to show that she was actually born outside of Britain. So
the chemicals in the dental enamel, and they were...
She's probably spent her early childhood in the German area of Europe. So she's someone who grew up on the continent, has a very visible expression of her community, and came to London, but then she was buried with like all of her kind of cultural signifiers, which is really nice, because then we see that elsewhere in Roman Britain towards the end. There's this very clear kind of expression of German identity.
So which of the cemeteries in Roman London was she actually buried in?
She was buried in the Eastern Cemetery, so her excavation was on Mansell Street.
Right.
That area seems to be used in late London as well, whereas other areas seem to kind of go out of use a bit more.
And within society in Roman London, does everybody get the opportunity for a burial?
There are several ways of looking at that, because it's Roman London.
Right.
So you get people who are buried in what archaeologists would describe as normative.
Right.
So you're in one piece, and you're either, people might put in a pot or a coin or something, and you're buried in the cemetery, and then you stay there.
Right.
We have other people where they're just represented by a body part.
Wow.
Yeah, so...
my word.
Recently at Crossrail, they came across just the crania, so just the top.
Right.
Of people's heads, which were deposited in a ditch. There's a person down a well. You sometimes get, like, odd body parts found in ditches. And then in one... case in the northern cemeteries where it was very, very close to the Walbrook.
And it was some like murder case that wasn't solved 1,000 years ago or 1,500, or was that like just some punishment, just stuff someone down a well? I'm curious about the well guy.
Case in the northern cemeteries where it was very, very close to the Walbrook, and it was a very interesting decision that they made to create a cemetery on ground that frequently flooded.
Right.
So you would get burial washout, so bits of people as they decomposed obviously don't stay together.
Yeah.
So when it would be flooded and things, bits of people would then be kind of like washed away.
But the ritual side of it's really important for the Romans, isn't it? Because they clearly mark this divide between being living and being dead very seriously. It's very important to them.
Oh, absolutely, yes. And there are some people, we've got evidence for decapitation burials, which some people are arguing is actually quite normative.
Right.
There's a woman again from the Eastern Cemeteries where she had obviously been buried whole, and then after a period of time they had reopened her burial
and then took her head
and
off.
Then they hadn't cut her head off, they pulled it off.
What?
And then put it on her pelvis.
What?
And then covered it up again, and then left her this really, really beautiful pot.
Why?
We've got people who are buried with restraints around their ankles.
Slaves.
Maybe. It's difficult to...
Prisoners.
really get to grips with that, because you would think a lot of the time that they'd, because sometimes the metal would have a higher value than the person, so you'd think they'd take it off.
Oh my word!
They haven't. So there was someone buried with 2 very large metal rings around their ankles. And then they thought that there might be a chain in the middle, but when they x-rayed it, no metal was shown.
Right.
But there's been cases recently of someone where they're definitely shackled and there's a padlock on
All right, 2 big things so far. I want to know what happened to the guy in the well, which is never going to be found out, and why do they, after time, dig up graves to pull the head off and then place it on the pelvis, and then put a clay thing and then rebury it?
So we do have evidence for enslaved people being buried like that. There's a huge amount of burial ritual. We get a lot of prone burials, things like that. So multiple burials as well. There's one from Southwark where it's an adolescent who's buried with a small child and then an infant, and the infant's actually got a tetina, proper special feeding vessel.
Wow.
So they must have all died relatively within a short period of time to be all together.
And sort of topically at the moment, obviously people are talking about pandemics, etc. We know that pandemics were very common in the ancient world. Do you have any evidence from any of the burials of a pandemic in Roman London?
No, we don't. But there is a DNA evidence for the Justinian plague elsewhere in Europe.
Okay.
So they found evidence for that. Yeah. So that was one of the things we did screen for when we did the.
I just want to say with the 2 kids and the baby obviously dying, they seem to die at the same time. Either a plague, which even a plague, I feel like, it wouldn't kill people instantly, and so the 3 of them, unless they were buried separately and then put together, or it could have been like some raid and the kids were killed or something.
DNA work, but unfortunately all we found was for everybody that we did that they had gingivitis.
Right.
They just had really bad teeth and gums. Yeah, because they can't clean their teeth properly.
Right.
And then the Romans had like these very peculiar ideas about what toothpaste should be made out of, like various kind of dried dog poo and
Floss, guys.
better left.
Lovely.
Yeah, we just won't explore that. But it's because the
Lovely.
A lot of the time, because the as they're processing the grain, the quernstones they're using, because they're quite rough in order to break that grain down.
Right.
Small bits of the grit actually become incorporated into flour, so that wears people's teeth down. So the soft dentine inside becomes exposed, and then they get.
So the thing that they use to grind the wheat down would end up leaving remnants of the hard material of that was used to make the grinder into the wheat, and then they would eat the wheat and eat the little teeny bits of stone, hard stone they'd use to grind the wheat, and that would erode their teeth away. That's crazy.
Dental caries, because it's softer and the it's easier for that dental caries to take place. We've got calculus as well, like plaque that's building up. It's also, it's interesting because when we look as a whole for Roman Britain, people buried in towns tend to have higher rates of dental disease compared to rural people.
What does that tell us about the diet of Roman Londoners?
Roman London, if you wanted to eat anywhere in Roman Britain,
yeah,
this would probably be one of the best places to choose to eat.
Right.
Because we have loads of evidence from all of the remains of seeds and plants and things for all the lovely Mediterranean.
I really want to say something about I'm going to save it for the end, but about it's just amazing.
Impulse. So where you've got the destruction layer at number 1 poultry, you've got dates which have been carbonised. So it looks a bit like the pictures we're familiar with from Pompeii.
Right.
And we've got things like black pepper, cumin, loads of herbs and spices all coming from the Mediterranean.
So that, to me, speaks about this sort of cosmopolitan nature of Roman London, where for the majority of time that Roman London existed, a lot of the population weren't British at all, but came from across the Roman Empire.
Yeah, and you can see that quite a lot. So through the inscriptions, so you've got a lot of military recorded through tombstones. I mean, we know that the military had burial clubs and stuff, so they were being buried in a very formalised, very recognisable way within the military community. And so, it's just really interesting because, as you say, it's like this absolute melting pot. London seems to have been kind of a space that was on the border of...
Before I forget it, okay. The like the grinding stones, and they would eat it with the wheat, and it would erode their teeth. That makes me think of all the times where we're coming out of hunter-gathering stuff, and we're making this new technology and whatnot, and new ways to make food, and mechanical ways to process food. And I don't mean just Industrial Revolution, but that's what comes to mind. Anyways, so it's stuff like that, and like in the very early 1900s, radium paint, radium, which is a radioactive element. It's a what's it called? You know, it's a radioactive metal. It's very bad for you if you come in contact. And there were these people called the radium girls who they would work and paint the radium paint onto clock surfaces on the numbers because it would glow in the dark in order to make it easier to read clocks at night. And they ended up having terrible radiation issues and getting cancer and whatnot. And it just makes me think of all the times where we're progressing as a society, and there are certain things that look so cool at first but end up being terrible for us. And it just makes me think of, like, is there stuff today that we think is completely okay that we're going to find out in like 80 years? People are going to be like, oh my God, they didn't know this is what happens. And it's kind of paranoid, induces paranoia.
Of territories.
Yeah.
And so there wasn't really a tradition that kind of kept being perpetuated like other areas, of a space that was on the border of lots of territories.
Yeah.
And so there wasn't really a tradition that kind of kept being perpetuated like other areas of Britain. Everyone who came kind of like just kept doing what they did.
So Rebecca, what can you tell us about this person from Roman London?
Well, although there's not much of them left, which is a great shame. I've got bits of their spine, I've got like this bit of their face, and I've got a bit of their pelvis. But actually, it is like so much going on, it's unbelievable. So with the bone, you see it's like a very like fuzzy appearance.
Almost looks like coral.
And the inside of it is really, really dense. I mean, the pelvis is a dense bone anyway, but this doesn't look right. You can see it in the pelvis, you can see it in some of the lumbar vertebrae, which are your lower vertebra.
Right.
And you can also see it in the jaw.
Right.
And this is actually Paget's disease. So this is a disease that isn't acquired,
Leprosy?
so it's just something that your body decides to do, and is very common up in the northwest of Britain today.
Okay.
And so this is one of the early people we have from Britain with Paget's disease.
Okay.
And that would have been made them, made their joints quite stiff. Sometimes it's very painful.
Right.
And then if that wasn't enough, they've then got this disease here, which fuses all of the vertebrae together. So it looks like someone's melted candle wax down the vertebra, and that would have made their back very stiff, probably quite painful. And then they've also got ordinary osteoarthritis, which most people tend to acquire. So they're not doing very well.
This is a really unlucky person.
Very unlucky person, but they've got this is the only person I have with Paget's from Roman London, so he's super exciting, and we don't get a lot of people with this disease either.
Okay.
So we can look at the dental wear. So we know that because they've got both their molars and they're really worn, that they're probably someone who's over 35, they're probably in their 40s.
Right.
But because we've got this bit of their face,
right,
we can apply some forensic methods which allow us to help identify people's population affiliations. So by looking at the shape of their upper jaw, their maxilla, we can see that they are of African descent.
Okay.
So that's
interesting.
really important because it's showing us that London is very diverse. And then we took one of their teeth and we looked at the DNA, and the DNA they have is commonly found across Europe and North Africa. But the caveat with the DNA is that that's modern people.
Right.
So that's where people with those DNA signature are found today. So if it's all across Europe, then actually the Romans were pretty much all across Europe.
Absolutely, yeah.
So that kind of fits in with that quite nicely.
Because the amount just this person can tell us about the nature of everyday life in Roman London.
Yeah, absolutely, because there's no grave goods. There's just literally these few bones all jumbled up, and they've revealed so much.
I would think the person was probably somewhat wealthy. I really don't know, or at least... because I figured it was someone with all of their ailments and ones that seemed to come up from childhood, not just at the death, would have been a very big burden to most lower class people. I'm really talking out my butt here. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just kind of inferring and wondering what you guys think. If they were probably if someone not so well off with all of those ailments would kind of be like cast away. I don't know exactly.
Amazing.
And one thing I actually noticed is how worn those teeth are there. So that must have been very painful.
Yeah, because the inside your tooth, so you've got a hard white crown, and that's really tough. But it gets worn out because the grain and that they're eating has, because of how they're grinding it, you get bits of stone incorporated in it, so it's like a sandpaper on your tooth.
Wow.
And then that exposes the brown soft dentine, and that's like really, that would be really sensitive.
Goodness me. And what were they taking for sort of pain relief for that?
Well, I mean, we know there's kind of lots of recommendations in the medical literature written in the Mediterranean, and they're saying, you know, things like poppy, that kind of stuff, poppy syrup to kind of relieve pain, and all sorts of other various crazy medical concoctions.
So poppy syrup, which is an opiate.
Yes.
So basically they're taking opiates for toothache.
Victorians did stranger things. So
there you go. Absolutely amazing.
Cool. I love this channel. Great channel. Interesting what they can tell from those skeletons, and I think it's... I would think that with a lot of burials with human remains, you might end up putting a skeleton with a set of vertebrae that don't exactly belong to the same person, but they definitely have some ways to figure it out. Cool. What am I doing? Mark Felton? Oh, yeah, nice steakhouse. I want to check that out. See you guys next time.